Okay, so you are studying Shakespeare at high school. I assume that's why you clicked on this video, because that was the title. Let's do it. So this video is not going to be about any specific text. This is really more of like an approach to how to look at Shakespeare, as well as just introduce some really important contextual information that people don't include in their essays nearly enough. First things first is you have to understand the plot. A lot of teachers are quite purists when they teach Shakespeare, and they're sort of like, no, you have to read the original text. I disagree. I think if you don't actually know what happens, it becomes very hard to develop any sort of connection with the text, even if it's just a tenuous one, purely because you have to, essay write about it. So don't start with the thick stuff. Like, go for the movie, go for the plain text version. When you watch the movie, I personally sometimes, when I'm first reading a Shakespeare, it's always with a, film representation, or I go watch the actual play. That's also a really good way to do it, because actors bring it out, the emotions and things. If all those aren't really your style, just read the No Fear Shakespeare version, okay? Try not to go for a abridged version, in the sense that they've changed the plot progression to make it easier to understand, because the linearity or non-linear plot is actually quite important to the whole storytelling side of things. So just read the plain version of something. Second of all is, don't only read the plain version. The reason why I think some teachers might be a little bit against reading the easier version or just the plotline is that students will forget that their job is actually to do a critical analysis, not just a plotline analysis. So you're not just talking about what happens, it's more like, how was it written? The words, the techniques, the specific symbols and motifs that have been used by Shakespeare himself. So that's why you shouldn't only rely on the plot. So after you finish understanding the plot line, you understand the character relationships and who's who, what's what, you have to, for the sections you want to talk about in more detail, read the original version. So when you're reading the original text, Shakespeare can be very hard to swallow. It's olden day English. It was hip back in its day, but for us now, it is quite archaic and no one enjoys it. So my best recommendation to you would be to actually use a voice reading app, and tell it to read it out for you. Because reading words that already don't mean much to you in your own head can be quite suffocating. It's quite a task. So make sure you just highlight it and tell it to read it out for you. It's quite nice. You can of course also enlist the help of any friends, family, siblings to read it out for you with emotion. The easiest way is probably just go and see a dramatic performance of it. But definitely read the olden day English. And when you're reading the olden day English, here is where you're looking for techniques. Okay? And that brings us to point number 3, which is, what techniques are you actually looking for in a Shakespearean text? Because I think it's just so confronting when you don't know the words, and also everything sort of just looks like it's just, words. Where are you supposed to find the abstract meaning? First thing to get out of your system is iambic pentameter, because Shakespeare always uses iambic pentameter, and everyone sort of likes teaching that without actually teaching you its significance or relevance, or whether or not you even want it in your essay. The reason why Shakespeare used iambic pentameter. The reason why Shakespeare used it is because it is the most natural, rhythmic, and beautiful sounding way of speaking English. Or so it's thought. I think it's quite nice. Iambic pentameter is quite nice to listen to. But the point is, Shakespeare did it because he wanted, and not just him, it was a bunch of other poets too. They wanted English, which was like a dialect at that time, to be recognized as a real language. Okay? So it's really because he wanted to recognize a real language and really the bar against which a real language is measured is, can you make poetry out of this? Can you make this language sound nice? It was quite like snooty, right? It's like, if you can't write poetry with your language, then it's just a dialect. So Shakespeare sort of was super cool, and he was like, you know what, my dialect, English, is a real language, and I'm going to write a bunch of poems with it. So iambic pentameter was used to establish English as like a legit player in the literary game. Okay, which is why we love him so much. And he also just sort of was born in the right era where everyone was trying to do the same thing. So that's why it's significant. But it hardly has a place in a lot of the critical analysis that we look to do in high school. Okay, so teachers love talking about it, but like, do they really know what they're saying apart from the heartbeat sound? I don't know. Okay, so there's that. And then second of all is honestly, this is quite significant. Verse versus prose. Verse versus prose is when it's written in poetic form, like it's in iambic pentameter. It has, in case anyone needs to know about an iambic pentameter, I will just explain it really quickly now. Iamb is when you have an unstressed syllable and a stressed syllable. So potato, you can hear that te is a stressed syllable. So if you have a line that's alternating between unstressed, stress, unstressed, stress, unstressed, stress, that's called an iamb. So an example of that would be like, I feel like after production Anki will take care of that.
Hello, after production Anki here. Yeah, pre-production Anki just dropped me that line. So iambic pentameter, I look and feel like a potato now. There you go. I look and feel like a potato now. Bye.
So, pentameter means that you have 5 lots of those. So you have 5 lots of the no stress, stress, no stress, stress, no stress, stress, no stress, stress, no stress, stress. So you have 10 syllables in total in the line, and then it sounds like stress, no stress, stress, no stress, stress, no stress, stress. It's like a beat, right? It's like in music, we have a beat. So this is like when you're speaking, you have a beat. So it sounds nice because it sounds like music. It's poetic. That's why you can write poems with it. Okay, so moving on from that, a verse is when they do use iambic pentameter and there's like some sort of a meter, like some sort of a syllable scheme, whereas like prose is just flat out words. Like you open a textbook, usually that's prose.
So basically, if this was a Shakespearean play, pre-production Anki would be speaking in verse, and post-production Anki, i.e. me, I'll be speaking in prose, because I'm a tired, sad version.
Prose is only used when a person's speaking to themselves, or they're speaking to like a person, like they're a lowly person, like a servant or something. Make sure you notice that difference. When people's sanity starts breaking down, they start using more prose because it's like they no longer have the functions, no longer has the facilities to put the words into pretty verses. So, you know, if you're looking at Macbeth, if you're looking at like King Lear, you see that descent into madness shown through that form change. For a high school level, like you're not going to really have that much time or word count to talk about things in that much detail. So really focus on thicker techniques. I say thick because it's like, you know, a lot to chew, a lot to bite through. So we're talking symbols, we're talking recurring motifs. 4 is the distinction between like why we learn tragedy and comedy. Tragedy and comedy sort of just helps you compartmentalize Shakespeare's plays, okay? So tragedy is the one where, just memorize this. Tragedy is when a hero has a fatal flaw, hamartia, okay? So that fatal flaw leads him to his downfall and eventual death, which is often what happens in a tragedy. And it sort of borrows tragedy from the Greek sense, where it was like of the form to have that hero with a fatal flaw, okay? And through that flaw, Shakespeare is criticizing people and making them more self-aware of the consequences of having these character traits. Comedy is about miscommunications, really. People are always disguised, people are not what they seem, and then there's this errors, these errors that happen because of this, and then eventually it becomes resolved. Often these characters in a comedy, they're removed from real life. It's like a dreamlike sequence. So they're removed from the home country, or they're removed from real life, so that they have space to explore these new ideas. It's only in, like in Midsummer's, it's only in the forest that they're sort of able to explore this really weird love triangle, and this person loves this person, and it's using the magical element to almost justify some of the odd things that happen with human nature that like society refuses to acknowledge. My best friend falls in love with my boyfriend. Historicals are historicals. Historicals are like dramatized versions of past events. So it's like the TV shows that you guys watch, like the Tudors and stuff, and it's like dramatizing these people's lives, and Shakespeare often uses it to make political statements about what makes a good king, what makes a good queen. Last thing that's going to help you, it's the underpinnings, like the philosophical underpinnings and thoughts or goals that form the foundation of all of Shakespeare's works and themes and motivations and meanings, right? So Shakespeare was creating in a time, you know this, called the Renaissance. You know this. The Renaissance is a rebirth of Greco-Roman. Greco-Roman means Greece and Roman. A rebirth of Greco-Roman literature, art, that sort of thing, as a reaction against the medieval feudalist society.
Post-production Anki again here. So feudalism, just look at this diagram. It's a system of hierarchy where it's clearly delineated who's at the top, who's at the bottom. God's at the top, peasants are at the bottom, and it was believed in European society and English, British, especially British society, that God was the one who decided who gets to be where. So if you're a king, it's because God decided you were good enough to be a king. If you're a peasant, then God says you're not good enough. Everyone's a cog in the system. No one really advocated for individualism. And that's the opposite of humanism. Humanism is the opposite.
And the only literature that was being put out at the time was basically just scripture, religious readings. Okay, so poetry for a while was deemed to be the devil's sound. People were not allowed to indulge in literature or indulge in that sort of like entertainment. So books and things were reserved only for the rich and only as like spiritual nourishment. There's this whole group of people in the Renaissance. England was where the Renaissance finished. It actually started like Eastern Europe. A big part of Renaissance was Renaissance humanism, where rather than the deities or the religion being seen as the most important thing, humanism talked about self-reflection, betterment of the individual. Suddenly you're not just part of a cog, like you're not just a cog in a system, you're like your own being, and you have control, sort of, over your own actions. And that was really opposite of what happened before. It's like, oh, if you're a peasant, you can't be a better person because God already decided who was a good person, who was a bad person. You're a peasant because you were a bad person. So humanism, it was basically like, we can all be better versions of ourselves. Okay, so it's like really wholesome.
So the reason why we actually have to use context is to help ourselves understand what Shakespeare might have been doing. So if you know he's trying to teach you lessons about how to self-reflect, then suddenly everything that happens in, say, Macbeth is not just, oh, he wants to be king, yay. It's more like, Shakespeare, I think, is trying to make us reflect on the possible outcomes of ambition and how unhealthy it might possibly be. He's trying to encourage the audience to be better people. So using the context, you're much better informed to make a decision about what Shakespeare's meaning actually is, which enriches the depth of your analysis. That's why you talk about it. That's why we use it. Use it in the second sentence of a paragraph in your essay.
So if you thought that was helpful, leave a like. Comment on if you want specific Shakespearean text explained. Honestly, I do think that there is a level of... his themes, super relevant, but his language just makes it so... it's like so unapproachable for a lot of us, I think. But his ideas are really, really worth studying. He's a classic because over the course of time, as critics continue to attack his work and try and figure out whether or not it's still relevant, the conclusion is yes, it's still relevant. So Shakespeare's, you know, he's a classic because he won the title. Alright, cool. Thank you so much for watching, and laters. Just because I like literature doesn't mean I can't.